So London Real has grown dramatically in 8 years, and almost no one in the world knows who you are. 99.9% of the people on the planet have never heard of you, have never seen one of your videos, and that's okay. 10 people, 100 people, 1,000 people, it would be enough. Because otherwise you gotta start chasing a Kardashian. My definition of marketing doesn't match what some people's definition of marketing is. I define marketing as anything we do that changes the culture for the better. If you think back just 100 years ago, when women didn't even have the right to vote yet, when it wasn't exceptional at all to be overtly racist, that there were just expectations in our culture that we have moved past. I think that each of us, if you've got a keyboard, has a chance to speak up in a certain way. Whatever it is you think is important begins with the word. It begins with, what are you going to say next that would transform them once they engage with it? Part of what we get stuck on is we say, oh no, something big is about to happen here. And so we have a problem. And it's coming at the very same time that people are looking deep inside themselves and saying, is this all there is? Clearly there's more than this. And the happiest people aren't the people who are spending all day on Facebook. They're not the people who are spending all day trying to get more followers. They're not the people who have the most money. So the thinking of advertising needs to be, who's in the emotional state, demographically, psychographically, emotionally ready to move, that I could put an ad in front of. I don't blog every day because I have a new blog ready. I blog every day because it's tomorrow.
The world is changing. Inspiration is everywhere. It has never been so easy to connect, share, and bring people together. We're learning from others and finding the best in ourselves. Challenging our beliefs. Sharing our vulnerability. Overcoming our fears. Transforming ourselves so we can transform the world. How far can we go?
This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is... When it comes to marketing, it doesn't get much better than Seth Godin. In fact, he redefines what you think marketing is, and that's why I loved this incredible episode. Some of his works include Purple Cow, Linchpin, The Dip, where he goes through some really fascinating concepts about human beings. The Dip is all about when you first learn something, you get really good at it, and then you start to suck at it, and if you put in the work, then you become the master. Purple Cow is what it says. When you see something that's a purple cow, wow, that is incredible marketing. And we went on and on and on. Seth blogs every day. He says that's more important than training, meditation, any other kind of practice. And he also has a lot to say about what he calls the industrial education complex, that all of us went to school to learn to be a worker bee. And we were not taught to think outside the box. And that's what his book Linchpin is all about. Someone that can go out there and make things happen. That's the kind of person I want to hire. And that's the kind of person you want to learn how to be, as opposed to someone who just takes orders or memorizes things or do what they're told. I love sitting down with Seth. I've been waiting to do this interview for over 3 years, and this man did not disappoint. So much to think about, so much to learn. He's got an incredible podcast, and he's always on the cutting edge of marketing. So get your pen and paper ready, because Seth Godin is about to take you to school. This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is Seth Godin, often described as the ultimate entrepreneur for the information age. You've written 19 books on marketing, including Linchpin, The Dip, Purple Cow, Tribes, and This Is Marketing, all worldwide bestsellers. You've also created the most successful marketing blog in the world, and you've been inducted into the Marketing Hall of Fame. In 2018, you launched Akimbo, a podcast where you share ideas around business, marketing, and culture. Your Akimbo workshops have changed the lives of more than 14,000 people in 70 countries, with your online Alt MBA accelerating personal and professional transformation by providing an extensive view of leadership, organizations, and change. Seth, welcome to London Real in New York City.
Thank you for having me. Thanks for coming all this way.
My pleasure. It's great to have you here. You know, as I look through all of your work, Seth, I always wonder if you might have inherited some type of marketing gene, you know, if it's somehow in your blood. And I'm wondering if you were always this way as a kid. You know, were you 8 years old giving lectures to your classmates about marketing? Because it seems to be part of who you are.
Well, we need to clarify something right from the start.
Okay.
My definition of marketing doesn't match what some people's definition of marketing is. I do not define marketing as hype, advertising, promotion, scamming, selfish, narcissistic, short-term thinking, which is what a lot of people think of when they do marketing or when they are a marketer. I define marketing as anything we do that changes the culture for the better. If you're willing to take responsibility for the work you're doing and you're bringing something to the world, then you're a marketer. Because if you do it better, it's going to work better than if you don't. And so, yeah, I've written those bestsellers, but almost none of them belong in the, quote, marketing section, because they're about things like culture or technology or how we organize to move forward. So have I been a marketer my whole life? I think everyone has, but I think that I've been more intentional about it from a really young age. Not because I was born with it, none of us were born able to walk or talk, but because I decided it was important and I practiced it.
Okay. Were you always looking for ways to make yourself better or make the world better when you were a kid, or did that come later, you know, through university and after that, when you started starting your own businesses and started writing?
Yeah, I was really lucky with where I grew up and how I grew up. I won the birthday lottery, and certainly with, you know, the privilege that comes from being born in 1960 and where I was born, but also my parents. My dad was the volunteer head of the United Way. My mom was the first woman on the board of the art museum in town. So Buffalo, New York is a little tiny place. Not that big a community of people who are leading. And so my parents certainly weren't wealthy, but we grew up acting like we were leaders in the community. And so there were always people traipsing through my house. And I grew up thinking it was normal to decide to contribute in some way, through example, through direct contribution, whatever it was. That was normalized in my house. And part of the work I'm trying to do in the culture is, now that we are not just in our house but online, the more we see that, the more we learn that what's expected of you is that you will be part of something and make that thing better, the more likely people will act that way.
I always watch, you know, the stories of the Kennedys, and it feels like they all knew they had to contribute. I mean, you can, you know, love or hate their politics, but it felt like on that compound, they were always looking at everyone like, what are you going to do for the world? But that is a cultural thing, because not everyone grew up with that expectation.
That's right. And it's still a choice, because some people who grew up with that expectation go in the opposite direction. But I think this idea of what we normalize in our culture is so important. If you think back just 100 years ago, when women didn't even have the right to vote yet, when it wasn't exceptional at all to be overtly racist, that there were just expectations in our culture that we have moved past. And the fact is that the world is changing faster than ever, and today is the slowest it's ever going to change again. And that cycle keeps accelerating. The question is, in which direction? And I think that each of us, if you've got a keyboard, if you've got a device that's connected to 1 billion people, has a chance to speak up in a certain way. So I've blogged every day for a lot of days in a row, because it's a privilege. I don't get paid for it. I don't run ads on the blog. But the idea that you can share an idea and say, what do you think of this? Or I assert that, and see how that contributes to the next thing, why wouldn't you?
You told me that blogging every day is probably better than meditating every day, cold showers, working out. You said that's probably one of the best things you can do as a personal practice. For anybody.
I think that's true. I think everyone should blog every day, even if you do it under another name. Like, I get that some people don't want to reveal their own self in this way. So great, do it under a pseudonym. Well, it depends. I mean, we live in a world where people can show up uninvited in your email box. You don't have to welcome them into your email box. That's fine. But the act, you know, I don't blog every day because I have a new blog ready. I blog every day because it's tomorrow. And that idea that there's going to be something from me tomorrow on the blog challenges me today to think about what's the smartest, biggest, most generous contribution I can make tomorrow. And that pattern continues. And part of what we get stuck on is we say, I don't feel like doing X, Y, or Z, so I don't do it. But the opposite is the way that habits are created. If you do something every day, then you will come to feel like doing it.
So don't wait until you feel inspired or creative. That never works.
I've never seen that works.
From anybody, right? It's all about discipline.
Yeah.
And what about people that say they have writer's block when they go to do that block?
Yeah, I'm notorious for saying there's absolutely no such thing as writer's block. I mean, there's plenty of evidence to show that it was invented in the 1900s, that before then, there wasn't even a term. And it came about partly because Percy Shelley wrote a poem, short essay, that said, how dare anyone think they could be a poet? That the only way you could become a poet is be touched by the muse. If you haven't been touched by the muse, you're out of luck. Don't even try. And that got taken up by people who felt comfortable having writer's block. But then it became a term because suddenly writing could get you to be Ernest Hemingway. And you stare into the sunshine of that, and you blink, you walk away. I'm just not in the mood, I don't have anything to say. But when I talk to people who say I don't have anything to say, when I talk to people who say they have writer's block, I say, show me your bad writing. Show me the stuff you've written that's no good. They don't have any.
Right.
I say, if you show me enough bad writing, I guarantee you some good writing will slip through. You can't help it. It will slip through. My friend Isaac Asimov wrote 400 books, published them in the old days when it was hard to publish that many books. And I said to him, how do you do this? And he said, every morning I get up and I go to the typewriter, and from 6:30 to noon I type. And it doesn't matter what I type. I just have to keep typing. And what happened was his brain realized he was going to type anyway. You might as well type something good.
I've been told that writer's block is when you put too much emphasis on what you're about to create, as if it matters more than it does, and that stops you from doing it because you're worried about the judgment or how it's going to be, and you should just stop that and just write.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting way to go at a similar idea, which is that no one gets talker's block. No one gets walker's block. That if you are physically fit, you can do those things. But when it comes time to put it in print, you're saying, oh no, something big is about to happen here. And I guess what we're both saying is this discipline of going through the work of doing it. And when I say writing, I don't mean writing. I mean leading, connecting, inspiring. Whatever it is you think is important begins with the word. It begins with, what are you going to say next? How are you going to bring this digital idea, even if you're speaking it, it's still digital, it's letters, to the next person so that it makes a difference to them. And what we've learned in the Alt MBA, so the way it works is it's a cohort of 120 people, and it lasts a month, 2 or 3 hours a day for a month around the world. And people come and they say, I'll never be able to keep up, and I'll never be able to do this. And I'm not in it, there's no video of me, it's cohorts and video and writing, video conferencing and writing. And at the end of a month, they're transformed. Because if you write that much for a month, if you give and get that kind of feedback, you can't bluff anymore. Because now you know you can do it because you did it.
Right. Does a vlog count instead of a blog? Like, can you put the camera on yourself and talk to camera for 5 minutes knowing you're going to have to publish it? Would that
I think it does,
qualify?
as long as you aren't talking about what you had for dinner.
Okay.
Right? I think that there's this vanity thing that goes on the internet that doesn't help anybody. And it's this faux authenticity of eavesdropping on somebody else's life. And that's a fine way to entertain. I don't think it's productive, but it works for entertainment purposes, but that's not scary. It's not scary to say, here I am walking my dog, ha, ha, ha. If it doesn't feel scary, then you haven't trained. You haven't moved forward.
Okay. So that writing could be a blog, or it could be some type of leadership, or writing a proposal to someone, but get and write something, which means you're creating something, which could be judged, which means also it could be great.
Exactly.
And it could change the world and help other people.
Exactly.
Which I know one of the people you looked up to was Zig Ziglar, who said, I'm probably going to totally bludgeon this, but if you want to have a meaningful life, make life meaningful for other people. Is that right?
I even like that better than what Zig said. Okay. I like that a lot better. Zig said, you can get anything in life you want if you'll help enough other people get what they want. And my challenge with that is the quid pro quo part, right? That because he came from a sales background, implied in that is, well, I'm your insurance broker, and if I help you get a golf game, you'll buy insurance from me. And that doesn't work for me. And so I've truncated it too. You can get everything in life you want if you'll just help enough other people.
Right.
Period.
Period.
Right? That's enough. Just the privilege of being of service. And I like the fact that you added meaning to it. It's really good.
Well, because it can't have a contingency, otherwise it taints
Right.
the original product.
Exactly.
You have to literally be willing to selflessly give, not expecting anything back, no payment, no congratulations even, just give it. And that's when it becomes its best form, I think.
Right, exactly.
With all the people connected in the world that can blog or create, do you feel optimistic about what we're going, or is it look harder these days because there's also an equal number of messages that are, vanity and narcissistic? How do you feel right now about the world? Well,
there are really big discussions to have about, what's the mean temperature of the ocean, and I think almost everybody is minimizing the impact it's going to have when 1 billion people lose their homes. But that wasn't your question. The idea of the media ecosystem and all the noise that's out there, and what happens when you give everyone a microphone. Steve Martin famously said that half the people are below average, and it doesn't matter what you're measuring, they are. And the idea that we used to have a gatekeeper for who got a microphone was good and bad. It was bad because it silenced voices we needed to hear, but it was good because it also kept microphones away from people who wanted to tear things down. When I think about what is on offer from the social media networks, it's really important to decode this. You are not their customer. You are their product. You did not pay them to use Twitter or Facebook. They are selling you to someone else. So they've created a regime where they make us feel bad all day long. And the only way to feel less bad is to click something. That's the cycle that they've built. And the problem with that cycle and the easily measured number of how many followers you have is it pushes people to be prurient, pushes people to be angry, it pushes people to tear folks down, because that's what sells. If it bleeds, it leads, right? But it doesn't build a culture that we're proud of. And the alternative is to say, I don't care how many people are following me, and I'm never going to hit the boost button, because my job is not to make Facebook happy, nor is it to make Twitter happy. My job is to create a body of work that I'm proud of. And if we can embrace the idea of a smallest viable audience, not the biggest possible audience, but what's the audience that could sustain you? So London Real has grown dramatically in 8 years, and almost no one in the world knows who you are. 99.9% of the people on the planet have never heard of you, have never seen one of your videos, and that's okay. And getting comfortable with that is the foundation we need to do our work. Because otherwise you gotta start chasing a Kardashian. And the problem with that is we have a Kardashian already. We don't need another one of those. What we need is one of these. And the way to be one of these is to say, 10 people, 100 people, 1,000 people, it would be enough. And once you can get comfortable with enough in a world of infinity, it doesn't really matter how noisy it is.
And you talk about this in your book, Tribe, about focusing on that small audience. And Kevin Kelly has the famous blog, 1,000 True Fans. We've had him on the show. And I try to teach my students this as well in the academy. And when I do it, we have a big Zoom call and their faces go blank. And I said, you got to find a micro niche, and I'm going to push you to go more micro, 2 more levels than you're going to want to.
Exactly.
And they never want to, because
you know why they don't want to?
Because I think they believe that the bigger the audience, the more successful they'll be. But there's probably something more subtle.
I think there's something more subtle.
What is it?
I think we don't want to be on the hook.
On the hook.
Meaning, if there's only 3 people in the world you're making this for, and they don't like it, you're toast.
Got it.
Right? That this whole idea of Kanban, that making the supply chain really thin, making sure that the quality of each piece is just right for those 3 people, makes it a much bigger obligation on your part. Whereas if it's 1 million people, you're like, whatever, fine, you didn't like it, go ahead, I got others, plenty of them. And that shift, that's where it becomes magical. And if you name any artist who has stood the test of time in whatever field, that is what they did. What they did is worried about a few and shunned the non-believers.
So it's the accountability that actually makes you show up.
Exactly.
The smaller the group, the more accountability, because you can see the faces.
Right.
As opposed to this massive
Right. How
crowd.
dare you not know what I wanted? Right? Because there's only 3 of us.
Right. So you have to force yourself to be in front of your ultimate clients, users, people.
Exactly.
And stare at them and look
So
at them.
6 years ago, I took the decision not to try to get any new readers for my blog, not to try to get any new readers for my books. I have enough. That's fine. Thank you, 1 million for my blog. That's all I need. 2 million would not make my work better. It would not make my work more important. It would not make my writing better. What it would do is require me to do things like listicles and have plenty of arguments and things like that would get me more readers. Not my job, not my goal. My goal is, how can I serve this group? It's enough.
Would you have to dilute your brand by definition to have more followers? Like
well, dilute is a tricky word, and so is brand. So
Okay.
let's decode them a little bit.
Okay.
Brand is not logo. Brand is the expectation that people have when you walk into the room or when they buy your product. If Nike had a hotel, I think we could guess what it would be like. If Hyatt had a brand of sneakers, we'd have no idea what they would be like. Hyatt doesn't have a brand. They just have a logo. Whereas Nike, they have a brand. Now, diluting it, Nike is known by everyone on the planet because they didn't have to dilute it to be what they are, which is this sort of golden aura of effort, right? Whereas I'm a lot more particular and peculiar than that. And so I would have to maybe condense it, refine it to be something a lot more symbolic than what I am. But I prefer to be the guy with enough obscure little bits around it that I'm doing the work I want to do, as opposed to looking in the rearview mirror and saying, what would get me the next zero of audience?
You mentioned your alt MBA. What have you learned doing that? What were you wrong about? What were you right about? What surprised you?
So I was surprised after we ran the first one as an experiment. The goal was, the typical online course has a 97% dropout rate. And I said, if this is the future of learning, that's not going to be acceptable. What would I change to fix that? And I did the opposite of every other online course in like 6 different areas. Like no video of me, and you have to apply to get in, and it's not free, and this and that. And we have a 97% completion rate and a 3% dropout rate, which is really great. So after the first one, which was an experiment, I said, I'm really surprised. I got a lot of these pieces right. We should do it again. And now we're on our 38th session because it's working. The thing that has surprised me by far is how people talk themselves out of applying to it. That the logic and the rationale and the excuses, they run so deep. Because if you go to Harvard Business School or Stanford, where I went, you can tell everybody what you did. And it costs $250,000 in tuition and opportunity cost, and it's worth it because you get to tell other people what you did. And that's really what you're buying. And this, which costs 1/60th the amount of money, it's hard to tell other people because we intentionally made it hard to talk about. What exactly is it? Where's the curriculum? Where's all the proof? Where's the accreditation? We don't have any of those things. And because it's hard to talk about, you have to talk about it to yourself. And in that moment, you feel on the hook and you feel insufficiency. And that runs super deep with people. How do we get folks to trust themselves? And this is something you deal with all the time, which is, it's not about more tactics. That the internet has become this sort of laundry list of, oh yeah, I read that blog post, only a paragraph of it, and I did this, and so why aren't I already successful? We have all the tactics we need. People have access to way more of this information than ever before, and yet we're not creating better work because it was never important to know that stuff. What was important is to believe that you have something to contribute.
Right, and to get someone to walk into that fearful moment.
Correct.
And these days, at a distance, without a personal meeting. Have you found ways of getting people to do that? Because, I mean, that's the essence of what I do in my academy. I often say I have many guises of courses, public speaking, broadcasting, business. But at the end of the day, I push people into their fears to realize they're stronger than they are, and they have a voice, and they walk out with confidence.
Right. So the marketer in me, who started to learn marketing from Jay Levinson and all the rest of my heroes years and years and years ago, wants there to be a top-down funnel. And in fact, there isn't. That the stuff I wrote about 10 books ago is the answer, which is the only way we're going to get more students is if our students get us more students. That it's the peer-to-peer connection in a low-trust world that leads culture to change. You don't change culture with the Super Bowl. Whether it's a Super Bowl ad or a Super Bowl halftime show, it has no impact whatsoever. But if one person in your neighborhood is driving a Tesla, the chances that their next door neighbor are going to think about driving a Tesla go up by a factor of 100, peer to peer. So all we do, and we have a tiny team, 7 or 8 people plus 100 coaches around the world, all we do is say, this group of 120 people, how much can we help them? How can we transform them? Because if we do, they will tell the others. It's this slow, organic thing that is way more frustrating than raising $100 million and blowing it on Super Bowl ads. But it's actually how you change the culture.
Make a great product, deliver wow, and then wait for them to tell other people.
And they will only tell other people if it helps them. They will not tell other people because it helps you. And that's a really big transformation. So the fax machine. The first person who had a fax, what did they do with it? Because you can't send a fax to yourself because you'll get a busy signal. What you have to do is tell everyone you know to go get a fax machine, because then your life will be better. You don't do it to help Rico or Canon. You do it because your life is better if other people you work with have a fax or an email account or whatever it is. Well, the same thing is true with these kinds of transformations, which is if I want to be able to talk to you the way I learned to talk, I need you to go do it too, because otherwise you won't get where I'm going. So it's that selfish ratchet that's also generous because I want to help my friend. That's why people talk about it. And so sometimes people who make a product that they think of as perfect, right? Like, if someone makes a coffee mug that's better designed than any other coffee mug, that has 6 Sigma quality, they say, why doesn't anyone talk about it? Well, the reason they're not talking about it is it doesn't help them to talk about your damn coffee mug, right? And if there was a reason that I needed to talk about your coffee mug because it would help my status, authority, or life, I'd be more likely to do it.
And so you're all MBA, ideally it's someone in a business that takes it and then says, wow, if my colleagues only could think this way, we could get a lot more done. Or is it also if my wife could think this way? Or like, how does that spread in the ideal world for you?
So the range has been a 16-year-old young woman, a 78-year-old woman from the Isle of Man, people who are poets and run nonprofits, people who work at Amazon, Microsoft, Chobani, name your favorite computer company or big company, and everything in between. So we called it the Alt MBA because I had a good 6-letter domain hanging around and I used it. Not the perfect name because of the Alt part and the MBA part, but when you mish it all together, at least it's something that's ours. But we don't teach anything you learn in an Alt MBA. That's in an MBA. That's the point. That the point is that the MBA teaches all of the wrong things. It teaches industrial compliance. It teaches adherence to things that you can read in a book. And what we're trying to do is say to people, you don't need any more tactics. We just want you to think differently. And we have found probably our biggest resonance, 45% of people who take it get reimbursed by their company. But the people who go through it write to us, they're better parents, they're better spouses, they're better executives, they got promoted, whatever it is that was on their agenda. And a lot of them changed their agenda. They thought, I wanted to move up in this hierarchy, but I realized that's a trap, and I'm going to do this thing instead. So it's really disruptive at changing your perception of what you even want. And so I'm not going to pigeonhole it by demographics. We're really focused on psychographics. What almost everyone who takes it has in common is they say to themselves, there has to be more to it than this, whatever it is. There has to be more to life, more to work, more to my job, more to my company than what I have right now. If that's what you feel inside, this is for you. If you don't feel that way, I can't help you.
But a lot of people are feeling that way.
I think so.
And maybe that comes from the industrial education complex and the television education industrial complex, which I want to talk about. You went to Stanford for an MBA.
Right.
What did you get from that? What did you not get from that?
So
because you road tested one of the best.
Yeah, I was the 2nd or 3rd youngest person in my class. And the 3rd day that I got there, I was really underwater. Not because I couldn't do the work, but because my peers weren't hesitant to remind me that I hadn't worked in an investment bank. I hadn't worked at a commercial bank. I hadn't paid the price they had paid. And in order to make themselves feel like that price was worth it, they were making me feel insufficient. And a guy named Chip Conley, who was my age, put
I've had him on the show.
a little note in my mailbox.
Okay.
And he did it to 3 other people. And he said, Tuesdays at 7 p.m., we're going to meet in the anthropology department. Would you like to join our little group? And there were 5 of us. We met there every single Tuesday for the first year. And we just brainstormed entrepreneurial ideas. We came up with thousands of them in that room. That was the biggest thing I got out of business school. Being seen by Chip, being part of that circle, realizing that I had something to contribute was magical. And the second thing I got out of business school was the summer job that I got, which I couldn't have gotten without it, and that was in Boston. And the story of that is that I got a job for the summer as the assistant to the president of Activision in California. Fastest growing company in the history of the world, assistant to the president.
Activision, gaming company.
Yeah. Okay. And they were on a roller coaster ride. It was amazing. And at the last minute, I found out I couldn't stay in California. I had to get back to Boston to be with my family. And so I only had 4 weeks to find a job. And I almost got a job offer from Lotus, the people who invented the PC spreadsheet. I almost got a job at Hayden Software, the people who did Sargon, the chess program. They, however, interviewed me at the International House of Pancakes and turned me down. So then there were 2 possibilities left. One was Parker Brothers, and I'm a gaming guy and have been forever. Parker Brothers offered me a job in their computer game division, which was thrilling. It was Parker Brothers. And then I got this job offer from a little tiny company called Spinnaker. I was the 30th person, and they were inventing educational computer games, which didn't exist at the time. And I don't know why I turned down the Parker Brothers job. Something inside of me just said, don't do that. And 2 weeks into the summer, Parker Brothers shut down the entire division and fired every single person. So dodged that bullet. And I get to Spinnaker, and it turns out the chairman who had hired me forgot to tell anyone else in the company that I was coming. So the president comes out, shakes my hand, goes back into his office, shuts the door, and calls this chairman and says, who's that guy? So off to a rough start. But during that summer, I learned how to be a product manager. And at the end of the summer, they took me aside and they said, we have a secret project, but it's going to start right now. Are you willing to go to business school and this at the same time? So I went to class at Stanford on Monday and Tuesday, flew on the red eye, went to work in Boston for Wednesday and Thursday, and then flew back to California. And finally, one of the professors at Stanford took pity on me and just gave me a degree, and I never went back again, which was super nice. But that job changed everything for me. And I think of it almost every day.
What did you learn doing that?
I learned mostly that there wasn't anyone who was going to teach me to be a marketer or a brand manager or a negotiator or someone who was going to deal with leading a team of engineers. I ended up having 40 people working for me, even though none of them were direct reports. I worked with Isaac Asimov and Arthur C. Clarke and Michael Crichton, who like Michael, I just called and did a deal with him. I was 24 years old, but no one was stopping me, so I just did. And this was practice for the internet, because what it showed me was that, yes, I had the backing. It wasn't my money on the table, but that I was able to weave together things, products that people loved. We shipped Fahrenheit 451 based on Ray Bradbury's novel. It was a computer game. And 2 days after we shipped it, I get a call in my office, because there's no email, and it's Herbie Hancock. Like the Herbie Hancock. And he says, man, I just want to tell you, I just finished the game. It was I was like, wait, what just happened here? And then I was hooked.
Hooked on creating products.
Creating something for people that would transform them once they engaged with it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is it true that every one of your books comes from a lesson you learned in your life or one of these experiences you had in a corporation or on your own? I mean,
I would say that most of what I write and teach, I do because I wish someone had taught it to me a long time ago. That what I do for a living is I notice things. Why is it like this? Like, why in New York City do you have to show a driver's license to get into an office building? How is showing a driver's license, bad guys don't have driver's licenses? If someone is going to infiltrate an office building and do an evil deed, how will a driver's license keep them from doing that, right? And I notice this, and some people notice this and they get frustrated. I try to decode it. And sometimes if I decode something and it feels more universal than just the noise in my head, I'll share it. Because once it's seen, then you can work with it. And I like when I learn something about how the world works from someone else, because it helps me get through a situation because I understand it better. And so with every book that I've written, what I'm saying is I'm noticing this thing in the world. And here's how I think it works, and here's how I think it might help you make things better. Maybe it's worth $20 for you to find out.
Super Bowl, we just saw a lot of money spent on those ads. Is that all a waste in your mind?
Well, it depends on what you're measuring, what you're after. Intentional action is who's it for and what's it for. So if you sell beer or chips, it has been shown that at halftime, you make enough money from sales at convenience stores to pay for the ad you ran during the first quarter. So in that way, for sure, that works. But maybe who it's for is to make people on Wall Street think your company is real. Maybe who it's for is to make the boss know that the CMO's office is doing something. Maybe what it's for is to bring in your best clients to wherever the Super Bowl is being held because you get to have a box. So it's for a lot of things. But if the question is, does it sell more cars or does it sell more anything? The answer is no. And the reason is really simple, which is this. Advertising works better when it's specific. Meaning, advertising cars to people who don't know how to drive is a waste of money. Advertising chips to people who don't eat chips is a waste of money. That's one of the reasons why Facebook is so profitable, because you can reach exactly who you want, psychographically or demographically. Why would you pay a premium to reach everyone? You should pay less to reach everyone, because everyone is worth less than someone. And so the thinking of advertising needs to be, who's in the emotional state, demographically, psychographically, emotionally ready to move, that I could put an ad in front of. Now, what they know at Mercedes is that they have to run $1,000 worth of ads to sell one Mercedes, and it's worth it to them. They don't know which one of those $1,000 worth of ads is going to reach the right person on the right day, so they got to run all the other ones too. But it doesn't make sense to run Mercedes ads in a country where they don't sell Mercedes, because you're never going to get anyone. So being specific, again, as we said a little while ago, is really scary. Because if you pick your audience and you're wrong, that's on you. The Super Bowl, way less scary. It's not your money. Let's reach everyone. And guess what? We'll get to sit in the box.
When you look at the Fortune 500 companies, how many of those get it right when it comes to their marketing, their advertising? You mentioned Mercedes.
Right. So Fortune 500 companies are basically nation states. That the people who run them are royalty. They have their own army and air force. They are surrounded by lieutenants, and there's a court and the whole thing. You got to be really incompetent to screw up a Fortune 500 company in the short run. In the short run, the market wants a boring product that's proven in the center at a reasonable price because it's deniable. Oh, I bought what everyone else bought. So the history, almost none of the Fortune 500 is the same as it was in 1950. They get replaced. Why? Because they keep doing what they were doing, because that's what they're getting paid to do, until the world changes.
It's the innovator's dilemma?
Exactly. This is the innovator's dilemma. Okay. Clayton, rest in peace.
Right.
And so then they disappear. But along the way, until recently, that was fine, because you could retire before that happened. So I worked with Kodak years ago, and a friend of mine did a lot of consulting for them. And the Kodak, most people know, invented the digital camera as well and owned all the patents. And as film was dying, Kodak was just churning into film as hard as they can. And my friend said to the CEO, you're going to have to scale back the film thing. And he said to her, come over here, look out the window. He says, how many buildings do you see out there? And she started counting. He said, I'll tell you, it's 38. He said, now another question. How many processes are involved in making film? The answer is 38. There was one building for each one of the processes necessary for Kodak to make film. They were optimized to do one thing. And as a result, you couldn't slowly scale back film because you couldn't close any of the 38 buildings. You needed all of them. They were a dinosaur, but dinosaurs were really good at eating plants in large volume until the asteroid hit. And the same thing is true for most Fortune 500 companies. So most of, the average CMO at a Fortune 500 company lasts 18 months. And the reason they last 18 months is because it takes 5 months for them to make promises, a year for them to have a grace period, and then a month for the CEO to realize the promises aren't going to get kept, and they get replaced again. Because unlike every other department at the company, the CMO promises to change everything. The CMO promises miracles. Accounting never promises miracles. Production doesn't, right?
Yeah.
But marketing does. And so they're hiring the wrong people for the wrong reason. If you want a miracle, you're not going to change it by changing your ads. You're going to get the miracle by closing 19 of the 38 buildings. You're going to get the miracle by changing who you hire and how you hire them. Those are marketing acts. You just don't call them marketing.
And that will never happen in a Fortune 500 company because you can't turn that ship. Innovator's dilemma.
It's
or can it
interesting.
happen every now and then?
Every now and then it has happened, and it can happen. We certainly saw Satya do it at Microsoft. It's happened at Microsoft a couple of times. Apple did it right up to the edge of bankruptcy once, right? That Nintendo wasn't a Fortune 500 company, but they made playing cards, and then they didn't. So it can be done, but the thing is, humans shouldn't care that much about the name on the door. We need to care about the people. And so if the place you're at isn't working anymore, just leave and go to a place that is working, because there's nothing keeping you there. The momentum, the sunk costs should be ignored. And you should say, I'm only going to get tomorrow one time. If I have tomorrow to do over again, how will I do it?
You mentioned intentional action.
Right.
It's something you talk to people a lot, that it's the actions that matter, not the thoughts and not the dreams. Can you explain that to people?
Well, we're scared of intent, because if you announce your intent, even to yourself, it makes it way more likely you're going to fail, right? So we go into the store and someone says, can I help you? You say, I'm just looking. I'm just looking is a statement of no intent. And that's the way many people have been trained to go through life, because the system wants you to have no intent. It wants you to do your job, get paid, buy stuff, put it in a storage unit, watch TV, repeat. No intent. And as soon as we start having intent, we hesitate, because who are we to do it, right? We feel like an imposter when we have intent. But if you can announce your intent, then you can get to who exactly are you seeking to change? What change exactly are you seeking to make? So you know who has intent? Surgeons. If you go to a surgeon, she doesn't just accidentally cut you open. She says, you have a blocked vein or whatever. I'm going to go in there and fix it. Intent. It either works or it doesn't work. And that action, whether we work for a company or on our own, can fuel us doing ever better work, because we can say, I set out to do this, and it either worked and I'm sorry it did, or it worked and I'm glad it did, or I could have done it better and here's how.
And how do you set intentions? Is it goals? Is it values? Is it a mission?
For me personally?
Yeah, and for anyone out there who wants to do it.
Well, I think that all of us have no place to begin but with ourselves. What turns us on? What gives us a smile? What would make our late parents happy? What would happen to our status with our neighbors and our role in the community if X, Y, or Z happened? So we always begin there. Even the most selfless person on earth. You know, you're diving into a shark-infested waters to save someone's life. Well, yes, saving their life is important, but part of the reason it's important is you want to be the kind of person that would have done that act and saved that person's life. Being that kind of person is better than walking away and watching them drown. So that's where we begin, which is getting clear in our head about what are the shifts we seek to make to become the person we want to be. And then there's a series of choices we have to make, but I think they're easier if we have habits. Habits get us results. Goals are results. But you can't, having the goal of I'm going to make a #1 bestseller, that didn't tell me anything. Right. Whereas having the goal of I'm going to write every single day and I'm going to learn this and this, and maybe the byproduct is that there's a bestseller at the end, those are different things. So I'm way more focused on habits than I am on specific goals that are out of your control.
Besides your daily writing, what are some of the other habits you've adopted over the years?
I ask why a lot. I have rules for myself that I make once and then I don't negotiate them again. So I haven't had a piece of meat or chicken since 1980 something, because I just don't want to keep revisiting the question, right? I made a good decision. The decision has served me well. I'm done with that decision. I'm going to go on to the next one. The habit of ignoring sunk costs, which is really hard, which is to say, it doesn't matter how much it took me to get to X. If I don't want X anymore, I shouldn't keep with that. The idea of not having a meeting. I don't have meetings. I will have one-on-one conversations all the time. But it's very hard to persuade me to sit in a room with 3 or 4 or 6 people as we go around the room and do X, Y, or Z. Send me a memo, put it in Slack. I don't need to do that. And as a result of no TV and no memos, I have 6 or 7 hours every day that most people don't have.
And why don't you like meetings?
Well, I worked with
performance.
I worked with Al Pittampalli on a book about this. He wrote it called "Read This Before Our Next Meeting." I published it, and the math is overwhelmingly compelling, which is that if the people in the meeting are getting billed out at $50 or $100 an hour, and there's 6 of them, and you're sitting there for an hour, not only did you just waste $600, you gave people a place to hide. And most meetings in most organizations are a bunch of people waiting for someone else to take responsibility. And why did we do that exactly? I was talking to somebody from Prudential yesterday when I was out in California, and she goes to 8 hours of meetings a day. That's not unusual at all. Why? Where did that come from? And she can't go to 10 because she goes home after 8.5. So the point is, what would happen if instead we asked every time, what is this meeting for? And I'll tell you a quick meeting aside. A friend who runs a Fortune 1000 company is also a brilliant computer guy. And one weekend, he wrote a hack in Google Calendar that erased every meeting in the entire company that was a weekly meeting that had been running for more than 2 months. And on Monday morning, he sent the company a note. And he said, look, I've just deleted all of the persistent weekly meetings. Let's try for 2 weeks, 3 weeks without them. And if you still want to put it back on the calendar, go ahead. But he cleaned out all the cruft. And that was brilliant because it forced people to take responsibility for calling the meeting as opposed to saying, well, we always have this meeting. And that it seems like trying to run a race with boots on. I don't know why you would do that.
It's a great way not to take ownership, is call a meeting. Bezos has a famous practice, I think, at Amazon, where if you call a meeting, you have to write a brief, like a 1-page brief.
3.
3, okay.
I ran one at Amazon.
Oh, really? And then when everyone gets there, they have to sit and read it, right?
In front of you.
In front of you, and then it starts.
Well, it doesn't start,
right?
Because if everyone in the room agrees with your conclusion, the meeting is over. What has to happen is, if someone doesn't, if they have more questions, then there can be a meeting. So the default is, okay, go ahead. So the meeting could be 6 minutes, we're done. And I went in, and people have played with use smaller typeface and smaller, like in high school. And so they make rules now about how many the 3 pages. So I laid out all the 3 pages. This is when I worked with them on the future of the Kindle. And I had all these inventions that I wanted them to put into the Kindle and ways that the Kindle could be better.
Okay.
And it was super, this meeting, because I was responsible until after they read the memo. And then someone else became responsible. And the response torch keeps passing. And at the end, if they're not going to do it, they got to say why they're not going to do it. If they are going to do it, they got to say when they're going to do it. And it just supercharges the whole thing. It was magic. I don't call that a meeting. I need a new name for it. But if you run a meeting like that, you have my blessings.
Okay, so they do it right.
They do a version of it that works in an institution that size.
Okay. Speaking of Amazon, how do they do on a Godin scale of 1 to 10 in marketing, if we want to call it that? Or in building a great company or products that make people want to talk about?
So for the first 20 years, how many ads did they run? And can you remember any of them? The answer is almost none, and you can't, because the marketing was the product.
Right.
What you talked about was, can you believe I got this book that I've been looking for 20 years? Can you believe it came in one day? Can you believe it? Right? That is what he invested in. That was brilliant. I think that...
Was that because it was marketing, or because that's what he thought would make him better than the competitors?
That's what marketing is.
Okay. Stop thinking of it in this word that's been defined by something old.
Right, exactly.
Okay. Yeah, okay.
Right? When Tony Hsieh spent millions of dollars on customer service to build Zappos, $1 billion shoe store. Can you believe a shoe store is worth $1 billion? That was a marketing choice. Instead of running ads, he spent it on customer service. The same thing.
Deliver wow.
Yeah.
Which is kind of what you're saying, because wow gets talked about.
Exactly.
Wow, they returned my shoes even after 3 days, and I did this. Or look, they gave me this. And,
exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. I have a couple challenges with Amazon, because public companies, that are growing tend to create toxic environments. And I don't think it's because anyone means poorly. I think it's because, and having worked at Yahoo, you're sitting in the executive suite and you are surrounded by 1,000 to 10,000 people who have stock options. Some of them have enough stock options that if the price of the stock goes up $4, they'll make $1 million, right? So now you got to take a decision. You're Cheryl or Mark or the guys at Yahoo or whatever company it is. You got to take a decision. And you know that it's going to cost the people around you millions of dollars, but it's the right thing to do. That's really hard. The stock market is greedy and selfish and short-sighted, and it leads to corporate destruction because companies miss opportunities. So Amazon has become an engine that I don't think is always aware of the impacts it's causing, where they could be leading instead. That racing to the bottom, the problem with that is you might win or come in second. But racing to the top is way more interesting. So how do you figure out how to pay the people who work in the warehouse ever more, not ever less? How do you figure out how to create an environment where your employees are challenged not to follow a manual, but to write a manual? And part of the challenge, so Amazon's culture is, I'm not talking about the cloud, but Amazon's retail culture is we're a store that sells everything, which is the opposite of almost every other business, which is they're a store that sells something. That in every other business, to get on the end cap, to get on the cash register at Walmart, you have to please a buyer and the buyer's boss. They are putting their reputation at stake by promoting you. And so I was one of the people who persuaded Amazon to start publishing books because they had everything that's hard about publishing. They just weren't doing the most useful part, which is picking authors and bringing their work to the world. And so when they finally decided to do it, they called my bluff. I had to go build an imprint with them. And what we discovered was that everything there is about we sell everything. So they don't have a way to promote good stuff over bad stuff. The system does. It's just a system. And everyone who's working there is pedaling as fast as they can inside the system. Well, the problem with that is that, again, listening to mass causes the culture to shift more toward mass. When what we really want as participants in the culture is for the culture to shift toward better. And to do that, you need leadership. So Bloomingdale's led with fashion taste. Amazon isn't leading any of the things that they choose to sell. They're just this engine toward cheaper, deliverable quality by the old definition of quality, which means meeting spec. And in the short run, that benefits everybody because it saves everybody money and gets people what they need. But in the long run, you've abdicated something really important. And I think there's not a lot of point to having a culture if you're going to abdicate that. Taking responsibility, being able to say, here, I made this, that's something that it's important to me.
Will that become a problem for them in 10 years if they don't?
Well, I think it's already a problem for us.
Okay.
And Amazon, you know, we always look at the titans of whatever is in the moment and say they're there forever now. No, that, you know, car companies aren't there forever now, and Macy's and Bloomingdale's, and go down the list, not there forever now.
Right. Even Jeff said this won't be here forever.
Right. So, no, it won't be there forever. But I don't know if they're going to stumble because of this. I think it's already clear that our culture stumbles because of this. Because the long tail, as Chris Anderson has written, surfaces all of this juicy stuff that was used to be invisible, but also the culture likes the short head. And what's in the short head drives things. And if you get rid of the center and you're just left with a donut with everyone with their own thing, sometimes we lose a sense of us. And I think that we're starting to feel that.
And Amazon promotes that. So the beauty is you get that book you can never find anywhere, but the downside is no one is connecting with each other about something. Like we used to talk about Jaws or Michael Jackson.
Or just let's try Harry Potter.
Right.
If Amazon had been dominant when J.K. Rowling wrote Harry Potter, no one would have ever read that book. No one. It worked because independent booksellers forced children to read it. The right kid would walk into the store, the bookseller would walk right over to that kid and say, this. And it was only that action for months that made a difference. Whereas 50 Shades of Grey only happened because of Amazon. 50 Shades of Grey and the Kindle, because you could read it without anybody knowing you were reading it. And that's the two edges that I'm talking about.
Interesting. I see that on YouTube with my guests, is that people are watching in secret sometimes. Because I'll have someone on, I've told people on, my people are gonna love you or hate you. And then I say, oh, they loved you. I don't know if they love you, but they're watching you. And they do it in private. And people stop me in the street and say, talk about some guest. And my team is like, how can they like him? He's horrible. But they're giving them something that they can't get somewhere else.
Yeah.
I've got 2 young boys, about to turn 3 and 4.
Wow, congrats, have fun.
Thank you. I started very late, but I'm glad I started. But I'm thinking about their education, so I really am. And I know you have thoughts on the education system, and you've said before you've got the compass, not the map, and I'm not asking you for solutions, but maybe you can tell me what I should be thinking about when it comes to how I educate these boys. I spent 40 years of my life in the classic education system in America.
A lot of famous colleges in your CV.
Yeah, well, I went to MIT and I learned there. I learned a lot of great stuff. And then I went into the industrial complex and the banking world and the startup world. But only in the last 8 years have I really started learning things from other people through conversations and taking actions and teachings. And so I always wonder if I had been learning like this for 48 years as opposed to 8 years, what would happen? I know this is a heavy question, but how do I educate my kids?
Right.
Tell us, Seth, how do we do this?
So I wrote a very long manifesto called Stop Stealing Dreams. It's online for free. It's been read 4 million times, and I condensed it into a TEDx talk. So I'm not going to summarize the whole thing, but it comes down to this. Intentional action. What is school for? Education is not the same as learning. Education is about compliance and a certificate. It's about accreditation. We know what school is for. School was invented, public school, was invented to create compliant factory workers for the growing industrial economy. That's why it exists. And it is organized the way it is organized, a lot like a factory for a reason. We process you for a year. If you're defective, we put you back and we reprocess you, right? You go through this whole assembly line thing, and on and on and on. So famous colleges, which are not the same as good colleges, are the last period in that sentence. Because if a parent does a good job, their status in the community, their kid will comply well enough to get into a famous college, and then the parent has succeeded. The famous college is a signal to various elements of the industrial economy that you know how to comply at the highest level and that you were born probably with privilege, and so therefore you're one of us, and then you get slotted in. This has nothing to do with learning. And all of the evidence makes this really clear. That learning, kids who know how to walk, ride a bike, talk, juggle, go down the list, they learned it. That if you want someone, for example, to like Indian food, what you don't do is have them read the history of Indian food and then have them take the Indian food test. And if they do well, let them take a course in Indian food and then take them to the restaurant. That's not how it works. Right? The way it works is you start eating it when you're a kid, you learn a little bit about it, you make it, it reminds you of certain things, and on and on and on. Well, most of the work that matters cannot be done by an AI. It cannot be easily outsourced to someone cheaper than you. It's not work we know how to teach in an educational setting. It just isn't. That it's the soft skills, which I call real skills, that transform people. It's the choice to be optimistic, enthusiastic, punctual, hardworking, creative. These are choices. They become skills, and you can learn them, but we don't educate people on them. So then well-meaning parents say, well, I want to educate my kids, but when the kid comes home with an A, we congratulate them, and when they come home with a D, we say, you did something wrong. What are we doing? We're sending them really clear signals about what actually matters. Instead of saying, you didn't look me in the eye, you didn't shake that person's hand, you didn't do that generous thing in this situation. Or instead of saying, wow, I just saw that thing you drew, that's amazing. How do we expand that? How do we create an environment where you're editing Wikipedia pages when you're 7 years old? Why not? No one can stop you. How do we make it so that you're organizing a fundraiser for the community when you're 9? No one can stop you. These acts, that's what I think of as learning. And the commitment from parents has to be, I think public school is really important because it builds our culture. But we got to homeschool our kids from 3 o'clock in the afternoon till midnight every day. Who's doing that? What are they consuming? How are they interacting? Because the easiest thing is throw the iPad into the crib, and now you don't have to worry about it for a long time, because they're just going to do that thing.
Where they get reinforced some of the similar messages.
Exactly. And so, you know, there's a school that's going very fast called the Acton Academy. And the folks from Acton have been corresponding with me for a while. The typical Acton Academy has 40, 50, 60 kids in it and 2 adults, including the maintenance staff. And the first rule of the Acton Academy is if a kid asks you a question, you're not allowed to answer them. Starts in kindergarten and goes all the way through. Kids teaching other kids, kids taking projects, kids making promises to each other, kids engaging in the quest for learning. And so the question I would ask an employer in the modern age is, if you've got a chance to hire someone who's done that for 12 years, who has figured out how to master this craft, knows this, and can look up when the War of 1812 was. Do you want to hire that person? Or do you want to hire a person who says, what exactly would you like me to do today? I think it's a no-brainer.
So do I have to find the right school and or pay attention that I do my own set of educating them outside of school?
I think it's the second one is way more important. I think that there are plenty of examples of people who went to public school, of people who even went to a semi-famous or famous college, but whose parents so led them in a different direction that you can pull that off. The right school can help a lot, right? In the school our kids went to was a mix of both, but it took a lot of effort to keep our kids and their friends on a different path. And that path is one that says, yeah, but what did you make today? And what inspired you today? And who did you help today? I was just thinking about Lenny Levine this morning coming in. He was a kindergarten teacher, passed away a couple years ago. And the rule in Lenny Levine's kindergarten class was you can't say, you can't play. And you just have to follow that rule. If you follow that rule, then what will happen is when a kid comes over and says, what are you doing? Can't say you can't play. Here, sit and join me. Let's do this together. Because it turns out interactions are at the heart of what we do now. Where are those being taught? I don't see those being taught in very many places.
Can't say you can't play, as in they have to contribute, talk about what they want.
Can't exclude other people.
All right, okay, gotcha.
Right? Every single kid in this class deserves to be able to engage with you.
On that same note, how does the TV industrial complex or the media complex play into that?
Right.
Does it echo back the same things?
Well, so TV industrial complex says, it's hard to believe, but in 1915, in the United States, typical household, person owned 2 pairs of shoes, 2 pairs of pants. And factories were ramping up. And their biggest fear was that they could make more stuff than people could buy. That was a giant fear. And how were they going to create a culture where status would be measured by what kind of outfit are you wearing? Well, public school helps with that, because the cafeteria, you know, and the status roles and the whole thing. And how do we keep that marching forward? Well, radio and then television became this magical engine, which is the opiate for the masses is sit here from 7 p.m. to midnight. Forget how much debt you're in. Forget thinking creatively. We got 5 hours of free entertainment. And the only thing you have to do to pay for it is go buy more stuff tomorrow. And so at work, you're supposed to do what you're told so we can make more stuff, so we can pay you. And at night, you're supposed to listen to what the companies are telling you so you can buy more stuff so we can pay you. And the cycle continued. And for 80 years, what a run. For 80 years, we made the world safer, healthier, richer, fatter, all of these things. It was magnificent until it wasn't. And now you've got stress, and you've got heart disease, and you've got diabetes, and you've got the fact that the economies can't keep growing on the industrial track the way they could, used to, plus robots, automation, AI. If I can tell someone exactly what I need you to do, I can find someone cheaper than you to do it. And so we have a problem. And it's coming at the very same time that people are looking deep inside themselves and saying, is this all there is? Clearly there's more than this. And the happiest people aren't the people who are spending all day on Facebook. They're not the people who are spending all day trying to get more followers. They're not the people who have the most money. And we know that the richest people in the world are 10 times richer than they used to be. They're not 10 times happier. They're less happy because they're spending all of this time looking at how everybody else is even richer than them.
And does new media play into that? Does it do the same thing, reinforce the
Well,
same
it multiplies it times 100. Except the one thing that it took away is the Nielsen ratings. That everyone doesn't watch MASH. Everyone doesn't watch Friends. You don't get to go to work tomorrow and talk about that thing you all watched, which brands hate. That's why they love the Super Bowl, because there's one left. But other than that, what we've said to people is, oh, you speak Portuguese? We have YouTube for you in Portuguese. And so now everyone can connect to the whole system. And the other thing that makes it worse is because advertisers can measure, they can measure clicks, they can measure conversion, because Amazon is measuring, it's all a race to the bottom. There's an old saying, which is, if you optimize a website enough, it will become a porn site. Because with every A/B test, just make it a little easier, make it a little bit more porny, and people will click on it. And so we're ending up with these greased rails, taking people in exactly the wrong direction.
Do you ever look at this and think like you're in some dystopian science fiction movie, and when's everybody going to wake up and see the madness?
You know,
how do you not get depressed, Seth?
I look at this part of it and realize part of it's my fault, right? That I'm the guy who invented commercial email marketing. That's what permission marketing is about. Before that, there was a little tiny category of evil spam, and that was the only email anyone got from a company. And I said, no, anticipated personal and relevant messages sent to people who want to get them. Yoyodyne got a 75% open rate and a 35% response rate on all the email we ever sent.
This is what year?
I built Yoyodyne from 92 to 98 and sold it to Yahoo in 98. And what I discovered after the book came out was it was right, it was correct, it built a multi-billion dollar industry, and then it would be abused. And I really thought people could act in a way that they would be proud of, but the race to the bottom clicked in. And so, you know, in the time we're talking, I got 400 emails that I didn't ask for, that aren't like spam, green card, spam stuff. But they're spam because I didn't want to get them.
Right.
And so again, the noise, because people persuade themselves that just because it's their job or just because they're going to make a nickel, it's allowed. No, it's not allowed. It's not allowed. You're not allowed to go into a bank with a clown mask on and try to make a withdrawal. You'll get arrested because people with clown masks aren't good bank customers. Not allowed to do that. And no, it's not allowed to hustle your way forward just because you're going to come out ahead. Hustle is not something we need more of.
But that permission marketing is something you invented, which was a different way of marketing. So for people that understand, it wasn't like you got this brand new unsolicited message and
right.
You tried to convert them. You actually got their permission to talk to them.
Correct.
And then showed them something they might be interested in. And
right.
Google and Facebook optimize for these algorithms now. It has to be a relevant ad and relevant.
Yeah, no, the Google ad model is based on permission marketing,
right,
for
exactly.
sure. But over time, when there's enough independent players who think they're going to win a jackpot, everyone will come right as close to the edge as they can. And so the edge keeps moving because Google's a public company. And as a result, they don't stand for anything like what they used to stand for. That they will, you know, they're wrecking the search results, they're filtering things out, they are acting as a monopolist because they need to make their stock price go up, not because it's the right thing to do.
And it's not because they're evil, it's because that's what any company does when they get big.
Well, so the phrase "don't be evil" was coined to mean "don't be Microsoft."
Okay.
And
which was dominating, and Bill Gates was getting into trouble with antitrust.
Right. So it meant don't be a monopolist.
Right.
Be open. That's what "don't be evil" was originally supposed to mean.
Which was an internal tagline.
Yes.
Right.
And it worked great because the idea of open systems is that the more people who can put something into the internet, the more valuable the culture becomes. And over time, consultants or whoever at Google have figured out, wait, if we're a little less open, we'll make a lot more money. And so it used to be, you do a search for something like fly to Haiti, and there'd be 18 search results there, all of which were real search results. Now there'll be 2. And the other 16 are things that Google makes money from. And so by squeezing that down, they're acting like monopolists because they know people aren't going to switch to DuckDuckGo, which is a search engine just as good that doesn't track you, et cetera, because they can. And so I guess the question is, when you go to work in the morning, there are only 2 questions to ask. And as I was walking through Grand Central, I said this to myself. The magic of free open capitalism is there are all these people in Grand Central Station today, all going to work struggling to figure out how to make something better so that someone will pick their company. That's how you make the culture better. But then I realized a few of them are going to work saying, how can we use the power we have to make things a little worse for people so we can make more money? And that's where we get into trouble.
What percentage of those people were doing that?
Well,
10,
it's New
20,
York. It's New York,
50?
so it's hard to say.
Is there evilness in this city?
Well, it's where big companies go.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, no, that's very true. All right, so Google, well, you've just given Google a rating. So this concept you have of the dip, when you see something like that and articulate it, do you feel like, I'm sure there was a Greek philosopher 2,000 years ago that had his own version of that? Or do you think that maybe this is the first time someone articulated it? Because it's a powerful concept and it helps people move forward. Where'd that come from?
I'm in the middle of one now, so I've been thinking about this. Every once in a while, you can give a name to something obvious, and just naming it is sufficient. And that's what I love about the long tail, is that what Chris Anderson did, I really wish I'd written that book. There are not many books I wish I'd written, but I wrote about Zipf's law a year before he did, but I wrote about the short head, and he realized, oh, if I just name this other part and explain why it's there, I've made a contribution. But then other times, like with permission marketing, everyone said I was an idiot. Everyone said, this is the stupidest thing we ever, and they all said that before I named it. And once I named it, then they could see it and it was original. That was pretty cool. You don't get many of those when you do what you and I do for a living, but I knew I had one. With the dip, what I was encountering there was, I was trying to understand why people who put a lot of effort in keep making the same dumb mistake. And the dumb mistake is they do hard work and hard work and hard work. And just when they get to the point where everyone else is quitting, they quit too. And if they just stuck it out for 2 more months or 2 more years or 20 more years, they get to the other side. Now, once you see that the dip is there, you have 2 choices. Don't start, or if you're gonna start, be prepared to go to the other side. And what we know, for example, last time I checked, there were 80 million blogs, and almost all of them are now defunct because the people who started writing them didn't realize that writing a blog means you have to do it for 10 years. Now, there are, I don't know how many million podcasts, a bazillion podcasts. I did a search the other day for a podcast, for a phrase. I found 15 podcasts with the same name as their phrase, for the same phrase as their name. And don't start a podcast unless you're prepared to get to episode 100, at least, because it's not gonna work. And yet, there's all these people who go in saying, I'm gonna be, and then at episode 30, they quit, when everyone does. So the purpose of the book was to say, just see that. Let me name that for you. And the book's only 90 pages long. It took me 2 weeks to write. And for whatever reason, it has really resonated with people. So that felt like a useful contribution.
And how do people know when they're in a dip or when they're in a dead end?
Right. So the question that I get asked the most is that one, which is, how do I tell them apart? So we can agree that vaping is a dead end, that there's no other side to something like vaping. Whereas playing acoustic guitar and hoping to make a living as a musician, well, some people do. So is that a dip or is it a dead end? That's the hard part. And my advice to people is, number one, you don't have to be original. You do not have to pick a way to make a living or an impact that has never been done before in history. And 2, the people who have come before you and gotten to the other side, what path were they on? So if you want to be a successful cardiac surgeon, you probably need to go to medical school, right? That's part of the deal. If you're not going to go to medical school, stop telling me you're going to be a surgeon. But if you do that, and then you get the fellowship and the intern, blah, 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 then you're on your path. So tell me who's come before you, who has made it through this dip, because you can follow that path. And that is the easiest way I know to tell them apart.
What dip are you going through right now?
So where we are with the workshops we run, we're up to 21,000 graduates now.
From Alt MBA.
Alt MBA and the marketing workshop, the freelancers workshop. We run a bunch of smaller ones that are less expensive and less difficult in terms of the amount of time you have to put in them.
Okay.
And it's not 200,000, it's not 2 million. And at some level that's okay with me because we're proud of the work. But in order for it to change the culture at the level I want, there's another side. And so it lines up with Crossing the Chasm, Jeff Moore's idea, which is a lot of people who took them so far like doing things that are new. And when you go up to someone and say, this is new, a lot of people in any population say, oh, you got a new brand of shoes, you got a new this, a new that, show me. But most people don't. Most people want something that's proven, something that's effective. And in between the two is a chasm, which looks a lot like a dip. And you get there and suddenly the new people, you're running out of new people. You need those people to tell their friends who are waiting for them to tell them it worked. That's where we are with these workshops. So you chop wood, you carry water, you show up, you do your best. And sometimes you don't get to the other side, and sometimes you do. That's the dip that we are in, but we are super excited about the community that we've currently got. So I'm not faltering at all, but I've seen this path, and I know people have gone through this path before, so that's what we're doing.
The trickiest thing about the dip is trying to make a subjective judgment of your own situation is almost impossible, because we're all wrapped up in our own emotions.
Right.
And then you can go back to your vision and you can say, look, I love what I'm doing now and I love these people, so I'm going to keep doing it regardless. But then if you really want to create the impact, you have to go back and be objective.
Right.
And this is this internal turmoil you have in the dip situation.
Correct. That's why it's really useful to have a book. Because sometimes people send me an email saying, I didn't understand your blog today. And I write back saying, have you asked 3 other people? Because if you talk to each other, you're going to figure out way more than if you talk to me. So having a name for the dip means that you can turn to her or to him and say, after you've read this and heard what I just said, do you think we're in a dip? Who's come before us? What is this like? Talk about this. It's the cohort that makes the difference. There isn't one clear answer. This is why the stuff McKinsey does is so ridiculous, because McKinsey thinks that just because they're getting paid millions of dollars, they can bring you a memo with the right answer. No, it's how do we find our way forward? What's the way finding we're going to do from here to there together? Because all of us are smarter than any of us. You cannot make an orchestra of clarinet players. And this is part of the problem with lack of diversity, is lack of diversity means you got nothing but clarinet players in the room. What you really need to make sure is you got an oboe player, you got violinists and everyone else, people who are good at different things because of their background, because of their culture, because of whatever, who can make the thing better going forward.
We see this generation war, you know, the older people shouting at the younger people and the millennials who don't get it and the privilege and all of that stuff. What do you make of that conversation out there? Are people missing the point? Is this something that's always cycled throughout the years, you know, and one that we just see now because of the internet and social media? What's your perspective?
Well, begin with this. My whole life, boomers have been the center of every conversation. And now that boomers are starting to die off, we're acting like everyone's dying off. It's been a 80-year run, right? But beyond that, yes, there have always been generational struggles. I don't think it's helpful, having just done it, to characterize entire generations of people, because you're mischaracterizing millions of people when you do that. Are there some people who are 22 years old who are acting selfishly and privileged? Of course. But there are also ones who are building social entrepreneurship ventures without a lot of fanfare, who are making things magically better. What we know is that the promise of the American dream, compliance and persistence and consistency, gets you a mortgage and retirement, isn't valid anymore. For most people, the deal's off. You don't get to keep your job for 40, 50, 60 years. And most bosses aren't acting as enlightened as bosses did back in the day when Reader's Digest, you know, sent people home at 4:30 in the afternoon because the day was over. You have to leave. So is it surprising to me that workers are saying, I'm not taking your deal anymore? Is it surprising to me that when you've got websites that are begging for their services, new jobs being offered, that they want to leave because you're not looking out for them? It doesn't surprise me at all. So no, I don't think we've created a generation of selfish people. I think that there's a lot of wisdom that's being spread at every age group. And if you want the kind of person who's beyond compliance, then you have to offer that person something that rewards them for the risks that they're taking. And they're taking emotional risks, not financial risks.
I know a couple in London who gets every one of their new employees to read your book, Linchpin. And they struggle to find people who finished the book.
Right.
And they want the linchpins. They're like,
Right.
that's the only way we can move forward. Do you hear this a lot? And I mean, yeah, how do you react to that? And what should they do?
Right, well, so if you've been brainwashed for 20, 30, 40 years to not be a linchpin, why am I surprised that you don't want to be a linchpin? Of course you don't want to be a linchpin. It's an edge case. Now there's way more, but it was an edge case to say that. There have been people who have denounced the book because it undermines the hierarchical structure of what they want to do and what they want to stand for. But what it doesn't say in the book is you're entitled to do what you want. You're entitled to ignore the industrial structure. What it says is the best place for you to stand, to do the work you want to do, to be proud of your work, to be secure, is to be the person who's peculiar, unique, a contribution. And the mistake that a lot of organizations make, and I don't know about this couple, is they want to hire linchpins, but they run ads and they pay people like they're cogs. So if you're going to act that way, don't be surprised that that's who you get. That what it means to find and recruit people who are linchpins is you have to work 20 times harder just to find them and recruit them. Years ago, Intel had a program when they were growing where they gave their top, 50 executives a blue card. And they said, if you ever meet anyone at a trade show, at a conference, at an industry event who's a linchpin, hand them this card. What the card says is, maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but one day and soon, you're going to need a job. And when you do, this guarantees you a job at Intel. No questions asked. You're hired. Put this card in your wallet. When you need us, we're here. If you find enough people and give that blue card to them, the linchpins will show up.
I like that. Has anyone taken you up on that? And have other companies done that?
I have never heard of anybody else doing that because it's so scary. And there's a charity that I help out now and then called the Grayston Bakery. They make all the brownies and Ben & Jerry's ice cream. And their model is open hiring. And what it means is next job goes to the next person on the waiting list. No interview. Next one. Been in prison? Next one. Been a drug dealer? Next one. And then there's 4 weeks of training, and if you don't do well in training, you're out, right? And then you're in, and they've got support, they've got childcare and all this training stuff, and it works. It changes people's lives. And their mission is to get other companies to do open hiring. And other companies go, oh no, we couldn't possibly do that. We need to screen. Even though there's no evidence they're good at screening. None. Just like colleges are terrible at screening. No evidence. They just want to feel like they did. And to give that part up, Intel gave that part up, guaranteed a job. Oh, what will happen? No, just let them in. You already figured out that they're a linchpin. They'll figure it out.
Right. And a linchpin is someone who can come in and make things happen in your organization.
Yeah.
Be personally responsible to carry it forward, make mistakes, make decisions.
Exactly.
Okay, and that's what you want. Do you want
That's what some people want.
Yeah.
Lots of companies don't know what to do with that. Like at the beginning of FedEx, one of their legends was there was a snowstorm, and one of their drivers, who I don't know how he had a company card, chartered a helicopter to go across a snowed out pass to deliver one $20 FedEx package. And FedEx talked about this forever. They don't talk about it anymore. Because FedEx does not want drivers who are linchpins. They want compliant cogs who are going to hustle and do exactly what they were told. Because they're an industrial entity. If that's what you are, don't you dare hire a linchpin. You'll both be unhappy. But my organization, we call it a studio. No one has a boss. Everyone's sitting in a circle, making promises and keeping them. But no one works for me because I'm a terrible manager. I'm not building an industrial entity. I'm building a studio. We make projects.
As an entrepreneur, you've talked about how you have to take all the responsibilities as a business owner and push them to some other people. And that if someone's listening right now as an entrepreneur, you have to stop being in your business and free up your time. And that means killing all the things you love to do.
Yeah, let me say it a slightly different way. There's a difference between freelancers and entrepreneurs. Freelancers do the work with their own two hands. If you hire me to give a speech, I'm showing up. If you read my blog, I wrote it, every word of it. Entrepreneurs have to build something bigger than themselves. That's why we don't call them freelancers. Larry Ellison doesn't do any software coding at Oracle. What is Larry Ellison's job exactly? His job is to hire every person he can think of to do any job he can think of. That's his only job, right? And what that means is that as a freelancer succeeds, what she tends to do is hire the best available person who also works the cheapest. You know who that is? Her. And so we end up in this cycle of always relying on one person to do the key work. That person's always responsible. That doesn't mean that person's doing the work. What an entrepreneur needs to do is say, if there's a job that another human other than me can do, I need another human other than me to do it. And if entrepreneurs are honest with themselves, they're probably not doing that.
When you're asked to speak nowadays, what is the big thing that people want you to talk about? Is it to try to come into their organizations and get them to think like Seth?
So I don't do that much speaking, and I don't do any consulting.
Why?
Because I think if you consult with somebody, they're expecting you will solve their problem. And I don't think I can solve anybody's problem. I think I can turn on a light so they can solve their problem. But that's not what people hire consultants.
Okay, you tried to do that with Kindle and Amazon. And
well, I wasn't even a consultant. I just couldn't help myself. Okay. But yeah, the reason that the Kindle is exactly the way the Kindle was 7 years ago, with no changes whatsoever, is because I'm bad at getting other people to do a thing that I think is a good thing.
Okay.
Right?
Are you bad at it, or is it impossible in that corporate culture?
No, I think if I had hunkered down, worked the system, had enough empathy for what each person in the hierarchy needed and wanted, I had enough leverage to stick around long enough to work it. But I didn't care that much. I thought, I've solved this problem. This was an interesting problem, but I don't care enough about Amazon to go invest 7 years of my life to work this to the end. So that was, but anyway, most people who get well compensated to speak are not getting compensated for the ideas that they say on stage. Because if you want the ideas that they're saying on stage, you can watch them for free on a TED Talk. Right? What you're getting compensated for is showing up. Showing up in person with your energy and your focus and your enthusiasm to help this particular entity go forward. And most people in the audience realize that they could have watched the TED Talk, but they feel like this opens the door for them to go forward. It is an investment. It's a signaling device, right? And so I'm well aware that that is what is happening when I show up live in person, and that's what I bring. I don't say, the next 6 sentences I'm going to say are so unique and so rare and so extraordinary that you will never hear them anywhere else but right this minute from me. I don't know how to do that.
Let me ask you about community, because when I started teaching, I never thought that community was going to be part of the education and the action. But when I started doing it, especially in a group situation, I'm sure you've seen this at all MBA, all of a sudden, especially when people are going into their fears and questioning things, this community materialized.
Yeah, exactly.
And now when they come to they come to London for a quarterly graduation, people walk in my studio and they hug each other.
Yep.
They've never seen each other in the world. They've told these people things they don't even tell their husbands and wives or their friends.
Exactly.
And it shocked me. I shouldn't have been shocked. Should I?
No, I mean,
how is this?
It's new. It's magic.
Okay.
For sure.
Has education always had a community and cultural component to it?
Learning has always had.
Okay.
But education's a little bit like going through the army. So yeah, your platoon, they're with you forever after that because you figured out how to do it together. You survived it. Right. But when fancy colleges switch to online learning, they're throwing community out. Because their whole mindset is, let's put videos up of professors, let's put tests up to prove you watched the videos, we're done. And they can't figure out why it doesn't feel the same. And so we run some of our courses on Udemy, because some of the people say, well, I just want to watch the videos. And we say, well, if you just watch the videos, you're not going to learn nearly as much. And so we charge as much as we could, so you won't pick this one, but there they are. And the dropout rate on Udemy is much lower than any other Udemy course I'm aware of, but still really high.
Yeah.
Because they're not part of a cohort. And so we spent, for me to make, we're running the creatives workshop right now, and it took me, 100 hours to make the videos that are in it, but 2,000 hours to figure out how to make the community that's in it. Because it's the community that's going to transform people. My videos are just commentary.
How do you create that community?
Well, we took an open source platform and customized it, and we built all sorts of, those dark patterns that get you hooked on Twitter or get you hooked on Facebook. We've built bright patterns that get you hooked on each other inside our communities.
Okay.
And so there's streaks of people who have shown up. There are learning groups, there's homeroom groups, there's mastermind groups, there's, in the Alt MBA, you will give and get more feedback in 1 month than you've ever gotten in your whole life. And when you give and get feedback from other people, community forms.
I force people to upload videos of themselves, lots of it.
Yeah.
And sometimes on my Zoom calls, people are uncomfortable even on the Zoom video call. And I say, who's uncomfortable even being here?
Right.
All the hands come up. And so when I ask them to put a video of themselves, even in a private Facebook group, they freak out. But since everyone's doing it, they do it.
Peer pressure.
But over time, they get used to it, and then they get so much feedback. Because a 1 minute video of you talking, there's probably 1,000 things to observe there and give feedback.
Yeah.
And then they find that if some old lady in Canada is doing it, well, why can't I do it? If some 16-year-old kid is doing it, maybe.
And then you have the idea of quantity is the first few, the masks are really obvious. There's gimmicks, there's all this stuff. And one of the gimmicks is faux vulnerability and faux authenticity, but these are all still gimmicks.
Right, okay.
But if you've done it enough times, sooner or later, you get to adopt a consistent posture that you can live with.
You mentioned faux vulnerability and authenticity. You see a lot of that these days.
I think authenticity is a crock. I think that authenticity is dramatically overrated. Authenticity is an excuse. The last time people were truly authentic is when they were 90 days old in diapers. Everything after that, you're doing something to get something. Everything. You wore clothes today, you went to work today. That's not the authentic you, right? The authentic you didn't feel like going to work today, just wanted to sit home and take a tub, but you went to work. So when we say something offensive and people criticize, oh, I was just being authentic. No, you're just regretting the fact that you didn't get what you wanted from what you said. What we want from you is consistency, not authenticity. Consistency of, what did I expect? What promise did you make to me? Did you keep it? That when we go to any professional, right? You got a traffic ticket, lawyer shows up. He says, I had a really bad day today. I don't care. I hired the best lawyer. Be him, right? I don't want to hear the authentic lawyer talking. I want the best one. And in everything we do, whether we're being someone's colleague or making lunch for someone, what humans want from us is to put emotional labor, that effort into it, to see them, the practical empathy of seeing them and what they need, regardless of whether we have a headache or not. So I think if you're hiding behind authenticity, it's probably a mistake.
Just be consistent, do what you say, come with emotional content. That is what people want.
I think so.
Okay, what about vulnerability?
So vulnerability is different. I think that if you're going to do your best work and be open to feedback, then you're being vulnerable. The act is to pick who you are being open to hear from. So I haven't read an Amazon review in 7 years because I'd never met an author who said, I read all my 1-star reviews and now I'm a better writer. Doesn't make you a better writer. So why are you vulnerable and open to hearing the 1-star reviews? They're not telling you anything about your book. They're telling you something about the 1-star reviewer. You don't need to know anything about them other than the book wasn't for them. Let's move on. Whereas if you can build a circle of people that you can be open with because their feedback actually is what you need, yes, then you have to be vulnerable in that state because you haven't shut those people out. You've invited them in to make your work better.
What about when you're vulnerable? Do you find that you can get your points across better? I mean, you've talked about the early days online and how you wrote a book and the other guys made Yahoo. I mean, people appreciate that, right? Especially Seth. I mean, they look up to you and be like, wow, you never fail and don't do anything wrong. And is that also vulnerability? Or is that vulnerability with purpose?
I think when I tell the Yahoo story, I am no longer, I'm repeating a version of an earlier me telling that story, right? Anybody who is in front of the public would probably be fibbing to you if they told you that every single time they did that. Like Bruce Springsteen isn't singing from the heart every single time he sings Born to Run. How could he be?
Yeah.
Right? And so part of what we do when we create is we find something in ourselves that will give others a hook to hold on to. But if we have to do it again, then we're recreating that. The first time we do it, then I think we are truly vulnerable in that moment because we don't know what's going to happen. And it's that this might not work mindset is part of where creativity lies.
That's why when someone's told a story for the 100th time, it just doesn't always feel very good.
No, they might not be good at it. I think that's different.
Yeah.
Right? That part of what it means to be a professional today. You're not a like the person who's putting the screws into the box all day long does it exactly the same way every time because that's what the industrial system demands. But we have to acknowledge that the person who is singing on Broadway 8 days a week is also in an industrial system. That they better sing Hamilton the way they sang Hamilton yesterday because that's what we went to see. Writing it for the first time, though, Lin-Manuel Miranda, writing it for the first time, had to bring a different thing to the table. So in this post-industrial world, what I'm arguing for is not that there is no industrial practice. There is. But then there are these magical moments of post-industrial practice, and those require a different sort of presence and confidence.
What did you learn from those early days with the internet?
Oh, boy. I learned everything from those early days. If the internet hadn't been invented, I don't know what would have happened to me. I had my first email account in 1976.
76?
Yeah. And
at university?
In high school.
High school.
But every time I needed the next magical invention somehow showed up because I have a short attention span, because I like living on certain kinds of frontiers, because interaction and community has always been at the heart of this. So I invented the most popular computer game in the world for Prodigy in 1989, right? Like watching it all grow and unfold has been extraordinary. And just in time for me, but bad news for people who need the industrial system to be stable. And I don't know where it goes from here. It's always figured out how to go in a place we're glad it went. But this is really the first time I'm seeing people who have such regret about that phone in their pocket, about the 3 hours they spent last night online. And so something is going to change because you can't torture 2 billion people for very long when they have choices.
So this is the most critical, dire point that you've seen this internet in the last 50 years?
Yeah.
Wow. And you saw it before the World Wide Web.
Oh, long before that.
Right, and before browsers. So you saw it at that weird inflection point.
I missed it.
Late 80s, mid 80s to 90s.
No, the browser was 1993.
Right.
I missed it, and it cost me $40 billion to miss that.
Because you could have started Yahoo or a bunch of other things.
I could have started Yahoo in no time.
Right.
I just didn't get it. I was already running an internet company. How many people were running an internet company in 1991? Right, 20 of us.
But you didn't know it was an internet company?
No, I knew it was an internet company. I didn't know it was a web company.
Right.
The internet's been around since 1966.
And so you had the hammer and you saw the nails and you wrote a book, like kind of a directory about the internet.
Right.
Right. Which seemed like a good idea at the time.
Did.
Would your life have been better with the billions and with that creation?
My life is great. I have no complaints. It's a good story.
It's a good story. And are lessons in that story permeated in a lot of your
books?
Because
when I feel like I'm about to dismiss something because I don't know what to do with the blank sheet of paper, I stop myself every time. Right? Like, I don't want to be on Twitter. I'm not on Twitter. But when Twitter showed up, I figured out what it was for and how it worked before I dismissed it. Whereas the old me would have said, I don't know, why would anyone want 140 characters? Bye. And it's that, why would anyone part of it? That's where we get stuck. There's a big difference between why would I want that and why would anyone want that?
So now you try to be open-minded and say, let's see what's going on here, as opposed to that silly is not for me, let's move on.
Why on earth would someone want this? There has to be a reason because they want it. So let's decode that and figure out where that takes us next.
Why do your students and my students feel like imposters?
So imposter syndrome, which was coined a bunch of years ago, is this feeling that many people get, which is that they're a fraud. And there's a lot of writing and talking about how to make it go away. And my controversial answer is, of course you're a fraud. And if you didn't feel like a fraud, you're either not trying very hard or you're a psychopath. That when you are talking about what's going to happen next, how can you be an authority on that? It hasn't happened yet. When you're talking about, oh, we're going to do the best job we can and you're going to come out of the surgery just fine, well, you're being a little bit of a fraud because you don't know that, but you're acting as if. And so that feeling when it shows up is a sign that you're onto something. Now, if it turns out that your judgment is poor and when you think you're onto something you're not over and over again, you have a different problem. But the feeling of an imposter is not the problem. The feeling of the imposter is a signal that you're onto something.
All right, so that's natural, just like the dip. Be ready for it, accept it, and then move on because you know it's going to be there.
Dance with it.
All right, exactly. Every day, get up and be ready to write, to fail, but you don't look at it as failure.
No.
To produce, and that's how you're going to get to where you want to go.
Exactly.
What's Seth doing in 10 years from now?
Yeah, I haven't asked myself that question since I was 25. It's just, the time frames keep getting shorter, and it also, I think, gets me out of a mindful state. This is what I decided to do right now, right here. Let me do this. And I know all the things I'm not doing, but the more I think about them, the less present I am for the things I am doing. So it will be different than what I am doing now because I've never done anything for 10 years. But this is a hell of a ride and I'm not in any hurry to get distracted from it.
And you've set up the habits that make you very happy with where you're going.
Yeah, the habits don't have to change for the work to change. Yeah.
Right. So you have the habits. I feel like I'm doing this, which means you could be going here, but that's where you want to go. You don't have to know where you're going, but the habits will.
Because I think external validation is largely overrated. And it's easier for me to say that because I don't need external validation to put food on the table. But the work you need to do to put food on the table, if you're deliberate about it, will give you plenty of time every day to do work where you don't need external validation.
How does an author remove external validation? It's hard.
Well, again, until 1925, almost nobody made a living with music or art. There's no guarantee that you can, but you can make a difference. So maybe you need to work 3 or 4 hours a day being extraordinarily good at something so that you can have 7 hours a day to write what needs to be written.
Can you tell me what the best day of your life was and the worst day, Seth?
Yeah, no.
Okay. You don't like looking back.
Yeah, and this isn't really about me.
Yeah.
This is about the people I'm trying to teach. And what I discovered is there's a lot of demand for this sort of personal narrative thing. But I find that the personal narrative lets a lot of people off the hook because their narrative is different than my narrative. So therefore, what I'm doing isn't relevant to who they are. And so I try to make it as widely applicable a series of physical laws as possible, not about, well, I did this, so therefore you can.
Mm. Do you think there's too much personalities in brands these days in that sense as opposed to the ideas?
I mean, humans want to see other humans. That a snowman doesn't really look like a person, but we think it does. You don't need very much to make something look like a person. So we personalize all of this. And we personalize the Alamo Drafthouse movie theater. And when people are upset, they call up and they're talking like it's their friend that let them down. So that's a natural instinct. The question is it of service? Is it helping the brand achieve its goals and keep its promises? Because the alternative could be that the thing you picked to stand for doesn't work anymore, and then you're in a box.
Does the state of the world worry you? I mean, you mentioned global warming. When you see politics, does that worry you? Or do you think we lack perspective when 1968 was worse, probably?
59 for sure was worse. 59, we were 15 minutes away from nuclear war, okay. Right?
68, there was people getting shot in Chicago at protests.
Right. So there's a distinction, I think, between things the media needs us to worry about today, because they're going to make money if we do, and long-term trends that are really a problem. And that's why the shifts in the environment are a huge problem because you can't just fix them by focusing on them for a week and have them go away, which you can for the typical political disaster. So I try to, I don't watch any TV. I don't listen to the news on the radio because I can be literate about the news in 10 minutes a day. The rest of it is just the media trying to profit from my anxiety. On the other hand, the long-term stuff, if I thought worrying would help, I would worry a lot, but I don't think worrying helps. The question is, what actions will we take? And how will we create a system and an environment where the ratchet moves toward dealing with the climate emergency as opposed to making it worse?
And the work you do should empower people to go out there and ask those questions.
I'm trying. I mean, I think that teaching leaders to tell better stories is a great way to do this. For example, I wrote a blog post 9 years ago that said, global warming is a really stupid name because global is good and warming is good. It should be called atmosphere cancer. Because if we had started calling it atmosphere cancer a decade ago, I really think that, there are no cancer deniers. Everyone acknowledges the cancer is real. Atmosphere is real and measurable and scientific. Atmosphere cancer makes it really clear to us what's going on. And if we could get 100 Hollywood stars, male and female, to shave their head like they were in chemo, all of a sudden we'd look around saying, wow, the Earth starts to have a problem. And you start to create this dynamic where it's socially unacceptable to stand up and say we don't have a problem. Right? I get that we can argue about how to solve the problem, but first, let's acknowledge that we have a problem. You better be able to go to New Orleans and look people in the eye and say, your house is gone, and it's gone because of something we did. And then you're gonna have to go to Bangladesh and say it to 100 million people, because it's gonna happen there really soon, and on and on. And I don't have any grandchildren, but it's not gonna change my point of view, which is, at this point, boomers like you and me, I think this is our obligation. We shouldn't leave it in the disastrous state that we're leaving it.
And what about politics? Is that a carryover from that old system, the industrial complex? And
well, so politics has been ugly for thousands of years. It just gets amplified by the media because that's how they make money. Right?
And it's more media now than it ever was?
Oh, yeah.
Right.
I mean, the newspaper used to come to my house once a day in Buffalo when I was growing up. That's all you got. And if you wanted to turn on the radio, you would hear the Rolling Stones. That's all you got. Now, the newspaper comes to my house every 14 seconds. Do the math. And
also, politics is now such a bigger portion of what the media used to talk about, which was
right, because it's basically it's sports where they don't have to pay the players.
Right. I interviewed a member of parliament in London, and he said, Brian, politics is show business for ugly people.
Exactly true.
Seth, I was going to finish with a couple questions. If you could pick up the phone and ring up 20-year-old Seth at Tufts, studying at that university, and based on everything you know now, give him some advice. I mean, what would you tell him? Would he listen? Yeah. Would it be relevant?
So I wouldn't change the course of my life because I've been so fortunate. So I would only say one thing, which is
the following success secrets are only available inside the London Real Tribe, where you get exclusive access and insights from our high-performance guests on wealth creation, productivity, leadership, morning routines, health, and well-being. To join our tribe community, go to londonreal.tv/tribe. Now, let's continue with the show.
How can people find out about Akimbo, Alt-MBA, you, everything?
So if you go to akimbo.com, AKIMBO, there's all our workshops. The podcast is at akimbo.link. And my blog, just type Seth into any search engine.
How is podcasting going? Do you enjoy that form?
Yeah, I just do it for fun. It's been, I don't have any guests. And I've done 110 so far. So it's 20 minutes of me riffing or ranting about something with a Q&A at the end from listeners. And I just go into the shower in the back of my office, which I lined with foam, and I close the door and I record it. Some people like it.
Perfect to have your own studio just like that, right? No more crew anymore.
Exactly.
Seth, thanks so much. Been a big fan of your work for a long time.
A real
so
pleasure.
many people that I've spoken to talk to you. I think people are going to want to touch me when I get back to London because I touched you. But I literally, people asking me questions. One guy texted me a question for you. He said, why does Seth think that marketing will change, is the way to change the world? And I think you answered that right in the beginning, because it's not your traditional version of marketing.
Exactly.
Marketing is
changing the world.
It's changing the world and making us better. So thank you so much for that. I appreciate everything you do with your content and your Alt MBA. And until next time.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Seth.